The 8,500th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is supporting the Non-proliferation Treaty ahead of the 2020 review conference. The agenda is adopted. I wish to warmly welcome the ministers and other distinguished representatives present in the Security Council chamber. Your presence today underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu, High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, and Mr. Yukiya Amano, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I shall now make some remarks in my national capacity. Today's meeting is a timely opportunity to take stock of the achievements made under the NPT and lay the ground for future progress. As we are moving towards the review conference against a challenging security background, the United Nations Security Council can and should make its contribution to a successful outcome in 2020. I would like to highlight that the Security Council compromises not only the 5 nuclear weapon states recognized by the NPT, including all 3 depository states, but also 10 non-nuclear weapon states strongly committed to the goals of the NPT. Some of them are also dedicated members of different nuclear weapons-free zones. This composition underlines the responsibility of the Security Council for the NPT and the relevance of the exchange we are having today. Advancing the goals of the NPT, it is 3 pillars: nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and the peaceful uses of nuclear applications. It is at the core of your assignments, and we are grateful for having you here, and we look forward to hearing your presentations. I now give the floor to Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu.
His Excellency Foreign Minister Heiko Maas, President of the Security Council, Director General Yukiya Amano, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I congratulate the German presidency for convening today's briefing. The possible use of nuclear weapons, either intentionally, by accident, or through miscalculation, is one of the greatest threats to international peace and security. The potential consequences of a nuclear war will be global and affect all member states. Therefore, it is entirely appropriate that the Council discuss measures related to preventing such a catastrophic outcome and, in particular, the one instrument that has perhaps played the greatest role in doing so. The Treaty on the Non-proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, or the NPT, has been an enduring feature of the international security landscape for nearly 50 years. The NPT is widely acknowledged as the cornerstone of the international non-proliferation regime and the essential foundation of nuclear disarmament. Its role as a pillar of our collective security is likewise an accepted fact. There are 4 key elements to the success of the treaty. First, it contains verifiable non-proliferation obligations in the form of safeguards on peaceful nuclear activities. Second, it is the only treaty that contains legally binding commitments to pursue nuclear disarmament. Third, the treaty establishes a strategic balance between three pillars of nuclear disarmament, nuclear non-proliferation, and access to the peaceful uses of nuclear energy in ways that seek to maximize their benefits for all states parties. Fourth, its near universality provides a clear authority and ensures almost global subscription to its normative framework. Throughout its long history, the NPT has provided tangible security benefits, not just for its states parties, but for all states. That President Kennedy's dire prediction that there will be between 10 and 20 nuclear-armed states by the 1970s did not come true can largely be laid at the feet of the NPT. That in 2019, there are only 4 states with nuclear weapon capabilities or suspected capabilities outside the treaty remains one of the greatest success stories of multilateral diplomacy. We can all agree that the spread of nuclear weapons to greater numbers of states equates to greater possibility of their use. That this has not happened is because of the value states parties continue to place in their membership of the NPT and the non-proliferation benefits it provides. We must today reconfirm that the security benefits that have been derived from the implementation of Article 6, those related to nuclear disarmament, have been equally important. Under the leadership of nuclear weapon states, states parties' efforts to implement Article 6 helped ease global tension, reduce great power conflict, and build confidence among nuclear-armed competitors. Reductions in nuclear arsenals, frameworks to reduce nuclear risk, and efforts to drive forward multilateral nuclear disarmament are all effective measures under Article 6. And all helped to create an environment conducive to broader international cooperation for various global challenges of our time, from peace and security to development and climate change. The 2 pillars of the NPT, disarmament and non-proliferation, are 2 sides of the same coin. Backward movements on one will result in backward movement on the other. Implementation of commitments made under both strengthens mutual trust and advances the cause of a world free of nuclear weapons. As the Secretary General has stressed, disarmament and non-proliferation are important mechanisms that help make the world safer and more secure. They are measures to help prevent, mitigate, and resolve conflict, and can and should be pursued in tandem with other peacemaking and security processes. Excellencies, the NPT has proven remarkably durable. However, that durability should not be taken for granted. Today, we find ourselves in an international environment defined by competition over cooperation and the acquisition of arms prioritized over the pursuit of diplomacy. The disarmament success of the post-Cold War era has come to a halt. In its place, there is dangerous rhetoric about the utility of nuclear weapons and an increased reliance on these weapons in security doctrines. Expensive modernization programs that will make nuclear weapons faster, stealthier, and more accurate have effectively announced the arrival of a qualitative nuclear arms race. Rapid technological developments will begin to impact our international security environment in many different ways, including potentially lowering barriers to the acquisition of nuclear weapons. Last but not least, regional conflicts might heighten proliferation drivers. The disarmament and arms control framework upon which the gains of the post-Cold War era were made is eroding, but we have nothing else yet with which to replace it. As a result, the prospect of the use of nuclear weapons is higher than it has been in generations. Together, these developments are placing the NPT under increasing stress and are exacerbating the fault lines that have been clearly evident between states parties for some time now. In this context, the 2020 Review Conference will be a defining moment. I do not believe that the failure to achieve consensus in 2020 necessarily signals the demise of the treaty. But it will set a poor precedent, and it will further highlight divisions between states parties. It will raise questions about willingness of states to seek collective security for all, rather than narrow, short-term, and eventually unsustainable security benefits for individual states. I believe we should avoid this situation. The 2020, the 50th anniversary of the NPT's entry into force, and the 25th anniversary of its indefinite extension, presents a golden opportunity to make the practical gains that will ensure the treaty's continued viability. A strong, political level reaffirmation by all to the treaty will be important. In the short time remaining between now and 2020, I hope states parties will consider four things. First, the need for demonstrated implementation by all states parties of commitments made during previous review cycles. Past commitments cannot be arbitrarily abrogated, or else they become no more valuable than the paper on which they are written. The failure of implementation undermines potential future gains across all three of the treaty's pillars. Second, the need for genuine dialogue about our current predicaments in international security and how the NPT can be a vehicle to reduce nuclear risk and enhance stability in ways that also take concrete steps toward nuclear disarmament. The third, the need to ensure the strategic balance between the pillars. The NPT is often described as a grand bargain. I see it more as a series of bargains, or rather commitments, made. It is important to recognize that they are all mutually reinforcing. Fourth, the need for creative thinking about what a successful outcome looks like in 2020. Since 1995, review conferences have produced decisions, action plans, practical steps and measures to improve the effectiveness of the review process itself. In 2020, states parties need to consider what possible outcome can both ensure success and drive forward implementation of the treaty. Excellencies, the security benefits provided by the NPT have been manifest in times of relative stability. They should be even more so in an era of international turbulence. The NPT should be a mechanism through which to help create a safer and more secure world. It should be a basis on which to build trust and confidence, to address emerging threats and challenges, and to lay the ground for future gains in the pursuit of our collective goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. Whatever a new arms control and disarmament approaches in the 21st century might look like, one thing is clear: the NPT will still be at the center of our collective security mechanism. It will have to stay fit for purpose. I remain convinced that the 2020 review conference is an opportunity to make headway on all of these goals and to make sure this linchpin of international security remains fit for purpose through the next 25 or even 50 years. I thank you very much.
Ms. Nakamitsu, I thank you for this briefing, and now I give the floor to Mr. Yukiya Amano.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished representatives, let me begin by thanking you for taking the initiative to host this important meeting on strengthening the Treaty on the Non-proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. As you know, the last NPT review conference in 2015 did not reach consensus on a final document. The previous final document in 2010 recognized that, I quote, IAEA safeguards are a fundamental component of the nuclear non-proliferation regime, play an indispensable role in the implementation of the treaty, and help to create an environment conducive to nuclear cooperation, end of quote. It also underlined the role of the agency in assisting developing countries in the peaceful use of nuclear energy. With our Atoms for Peace and Development mandate, the IAEA has supported the United Nations in all NPT review conferences. I believe our dual role of nuclear verification and assisting with peaceful uses is highly relevant to state parties to the NPT. Mr. President, the IAEA now implements safeguards in 182 countries, 179 of which are NPT member states. Non-nuclear weapons states are required under the NPT to conclude a comprehensive safeguard agreement with the IAEA. They must declare all nuclear material in peaceful nuclear activities. The safeguards conclusion drawn by the agency, which are based on our independent verification and findings, provide credible assurance to the international community that states are abiding by their safeguards obligations. In 1997, the IAEA Board of Governors approved the Model Additional Protocol, generally known as the AP. This is a powerful verification tool that gives the agency broader access to information about all parts of our state's nuclear fuel cycle. It also gives our inspectors greater access to sites and locations, in some cases with as little as 2 hours' notice. When I became the IAEA Director General in 2009, only 94 countries were implementing the AP. Today, 134 countries have brought AP into force. This is very encouraging. However, the combination of a comprehensive safeguards agreement and the AP needs to become universal. I encourage state parties to the NPT without comprehensive safeguards agreement are in force to bring such agreement into force without delay. I also ask all countries that have not yet done so to bring into force and implement additional protocol. Mr. President, the steady increase in the amount of nuclear material and number of nuclear facilities under IAEA safeguards and continuing pressure on a regular budget are among the key challenges facing the agency today. Under the IAEA statute, inspections must be financed through the regular budget. For some years, our regular budget has had close to zero increase, and this year it has actually been cut. If our regular budget continues to suffer cuts in the coming years, this could seriously affect our nuclear verification activities. Mr. President, the nuclear programs of Iran and the DPRK remain among the top items of the IAEA's agenda. The IAEA has focused on Iran's nuclear activities since 2002. In December 2015, I presented a final assessment on past and present outstanding issues regarding Iran's nuclear program to the IAEA board. I stated that Iran had conducted a range of activities relevant to the development of nuclear explosive device before the end of 2003. However, these activities did not advance beyond feasibility and scientific studies and the acquisition of certain relevant technical competences and capabilities. I also stated that we had no credible indications of activities in Iran relevant to the development of nuclear explosive device after 2009. Since January 2016, the agency has been verifying and monitoring Iran's implementation of its nuclear-related commitments under the JCPOA. In my regular reports to the board, I have stated that Iran is implementing those commitments. It is essential that Iran continues to fully implement its commitments. Our inspectors have had access to all the sites and locations in Iran which they needed to visit. The agency continues to verify the non-diversion of nuclear material declared by Iran under its NPT Safeguards Agreement. Evaluations regarding the absence of undeclared nuclear material and activities in Iran continue. The implementation in Iran of the Comprehensive Safeguard Agreement, additional protocol, and additional transparency measures under the JCPOA amounts to the most robust verification system in existence anywhere in the world. Mr. President, it is almost 10 years since IAEA inspectors were required to leave North Korea. The agency continues to monitor the DPRK's nuclear program and evaluate all safeguards relevant information available to it, including open source information and satellite imagery. In the past 10 years, the DPRK's nuclear program has significantly expanded. The country announced in 2009 that it would start uranium enrichment and build a light water reactor. In 2013, it announced that it would take measures to readjust and restart all the nuclear facilities in Yongbyon. Since then, the agency has observed indications of the operation of the 5-megawatt reactor and reprocessing plant, the extension of the building housing the reported centrifuge enrichment facility, and the construction of the light water reactor. Since 2009, the DPRK has announced on 5 separate occasions that it had conducted a nuclear test in addition to the one announced in 2006. Over the last year, activities at some facilities continued or developed further, while some other facilities appeared not to be operating. I report regularly on these activities to our board. However, without access, the agency cannot confirm the nature and purpose of these activities. The IAEA closely follows international developments on the DPRK nuclear issue. We hope that these processes will lead to an agreement and to the implementation of concrete denuclearization measures. The agency does not have a role in political negotiations among countries concerned. However, it is very important that any agreement on denuclearization is accompanied by an effective and sustainable verification mechanism. The IAEA, with its long experience and well-established practices, is the only international organization that can verify and monitor denuclearization in an impartial, independent, and objective manner. This would help to make the implementation of any agreement sustainable. It would also contribute to the denuclearization of the DPRK in a complete, verifiable, and irreversible manner as required by numerous resolutions of the Security Council. Since 2017, the agency has intensified its efforts to monitor the DPRK nuclear program and enhanced its readiness to undertake verification and monitoring activities in the DPRK if a political agreement is reached among countries concerned. Subject to the approval of our Board of Governors, we could respond within weeks to any request to send inspectors back to the DPRK. Mr. President, let me note briefly that the IAEA makes an important contribution to the establishment of a world free of nuclear weapons in a number of ways. We assist states in creating nuclear weapon-free zones, which already cover vast regions of the world. In 2012, for example, the agency provided background documentation to the facilitator for the United Nations Conference on the establishment of a Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and all other weapons of mass destruction. It described the work undertaken by the IAEA and the experience gained concerning modalities for a zone free of nuclear weapons in the Middle East. If requested by member states, the IAEA can play a role in nuclear disarmament by sharing its experience in the implementation of verification. Mr. President, the IAEA Technical Cooperation Program is the main vehicle for the transfer of nuclear technology based on the agency's statute and on request from member states. While the focus of our technical cooperation work is on developing countries, we provide assistance to all IAEA member states. The agency helps to improve the health and prosperity of millions of people by making nuclear science and technology available in healthcare, food and agriculture, industry, and many other areas. An extensive modernization of our nuclear applications laboratories in Cybersdorf, near Vienna, is nearly complete, thanks to the generous contribution from many member states. This will enable us to deliver improved services to member states to make food safer, improve control of harmful insect pests, and maximize the benefit of new radiation technology for cancer treatment, to name just a few examples. Helping countries to achieve the sustainable development goals using relevant nuclear technology is an important part of our work. In fact, the IAEA helps countries to use nuclear science and technology to meet at least 9 of the 17 SDGs directly. The IAEA Peaceful Use Initiative, launched in 2010, provides additional funds for our technical cooperation activities. It has helped to raise over 140 million euros for around 300 projects that benefit more than 150 countries. I'm grateful to all the countries that support this valuable initiative. Mr. President, nuclear power can help to address the twin challenges of ensuring reliable energy supplies and curbing greenhouse gas emissions. Today, nuclear power produces 10% of the world's electricity. But when it comes to the low-carbon electricity, nuclear generates almost 1/3 of the global total. The agency's latest annual projections show that nuclear power will continue to play a key role in the world's low-carbon energy mix. However, without significant progress on using the full potential of nuclear power, it will be difficult for the world to secure sufficient energy to achieve sustainable development and to mitigate climate change. Mr. President, utmost attention to safety and security is essential in all uses of nuclear and radiation technologies. Nuclear safety and security are national responsibilities, but the IAEA plays a central role in helping countries to cooperate effectively in these areas. We continue to assess the effectiveness of agency peer review and advisory services in nuclear safety and security so that they can better support member states in the application of IAEA safety standards and security guidance. Our work in nuclear security is one of our high priority issues. By helping to prevent nuclear and other radioactive material from falling into the hands of terrorists or other criminals, the agency makes an additional important contribution to international security. The next IAEA International Conference on Nuclear Security will take place at ministerial level in Vienna in February 2020. Mr. President, by undertaking the activities I have outlined, the IAEA delivers concrete results for the benefit of our 171 member states. Effective and efficient management has been the driving force behind the many achievements in which we take pride. In order to further strengthen our capability, I am working hard to increase the representation of women, especially at senior level. I am confident that state parties to the NPT, most of whom are also IAEA member states, will continue to derive great benefit from the work of the agency. I hope that the 2020 NPT Review Conference will be a success and will make an important contribution to strengthening international peace and security. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your briefing, Mr. Amano. Ms. Nakamitsu and Mr. Amano, you have illustrated how much the NPT has contributed to peace and security since its entry into force. And you have highlighted the efforts that are needed to add more chapters to the success story of the NPT represent. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs of Germany. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, there is a saying that goes, you never really miss something until it's gone. But there are some things that we cannot afford to lose. One such item is the Non-proliferation Treaty. And let's imagine for a minute that the NPT had never existed. Far more states would have nuclear weapons. There would have been nothing to put the brakes on the nuclear programs still running after the Cold War. And mutual distrust would be much higher. In short, our world would be far less safe. The NPT is a good example to illustrate what Finnish diplomat Martti Koskeniemi means when he describes international law as a gentle civilizer of nations. Another such civilizer is the International Atomic Energy Agency. And just think what the world would be like without the agency. We wouldn't have such high universal safeguarding standards. We wouldn't have civilian reactor technology, which in most countries runs without highly enriched uranium. 300 safeguard agreements, 1,500 cameras installed, 3,000 on-site inspections conducted, more than 1 million documents evaluated. None of this would have happened. The International Atomic Energy Agency also plays an indispensable role in the implementation of the JCPOA, a milestone in non-proliferation diplomacy. That's why we have to do everything possible to ensure that the agency can continue to work in an independent and neutral manner. And that applies in the case of North Korea, for instance, that we need the International Atomic Energy Agency's verification capabilities. It is simply unacceptable for North Korea to become the first country to establish itself as a nuclear power by openly violating the NPT. The proliferation risk would be immense. It would be add fuel to the fire of rearmament. And finally, it would reward the bad behavior of a country that has repeatedly ignored Security Council resolutions. North Korea needs to embark on a credible process of denuclearization. That is what we expect, not least as chair of the Sanction Committee of North Korea. And if we want to maintain the NPT and its universality, we need to preserve the balance at its heart. The balance between nuclear non-proliferation, peaceful use of nuclear technology, and the nuclear disarmament imperative. In concrete terms, the 2020 NPT Review Conference need to make it clear that Article 6 of the treaty still applies. The recognized nuclear weapon states need to disarm too. That is their duty, and we expect them to fulfill it. Also, it is high time to ensure the appointment of the president of the review conference to make progress. We need a roadmap that will get us back on track with nuclear disarmament. I would like to outline 3 specific elements here. Firstly, we need to take tangible steps towards strategic risk reduction. We need more transparency on nuclear arsenals, crisis-proof channels of communication, revive dialogue among the P5, which carry particular nuclear responsibility. Secondly, we have to lay the technical groundwork for a world free of nuclear weapons. Perhaps the most important part of that is credible verification. For instance, how can non-nuclear weapon states verify the proper dismantling of a nuclear warhead without gaining access to its blueprints? To seek answers to that question, Germany and France are jointly hosting a disarmament verification exercise in September, to which you are all invited. Thirdly, we must strengthen and develop the architecture of nuclear arms control. We have been biding time for far too long. Let's start negotiations on a fissile material cut-off treaty. Different views on certain aspects should be clarified during negotiations. They should not hinder the start of negotiations. And let's finally get the comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty into force. Nuclear tests should be a thing of the past. Distinguished colleagues, whether in Europe, in Asia, or anywhere else, we cannot afford any more shock to our security and stability. We must preserve crucial and effective treaties like New START II. It doesn't only contribute to security between the United States and Russia. It's also a pillar of security in Europe and of the global nuclear order. And it fulfills an obligation that arises directly out of the NPT. I firmly believe that further reductions are possible without any loss of security. The United States and Russia could and should continue to cut the number of warheads and delivery systems. Ladies and gentlemen, especially in the times of increasingly divergent positions, we must preserve our achievements. The NPT is such a universal achievement, a gentle civilizer of nations. We must safeguard its future in 2020. And that job will require energy and commitment from all of us. Our shared security and peace around the world are surely worth it. Thank you. I resume now my function as President of the Council, and I now give the floor to those Council members who wish to make statements. First, I give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Retno Marsudi, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia.
Mr. President, the very existence of nuclear weapons is threatening the world's very existence. Total elimination is the only guarantee to avoid global catastrophe. Indonesia is therefore a strong and consistent supporter of the NPT, whose objective can only be achieved with a balanced, comprehensive, and non-discriminatory implementation of the treaty 3 pillars. In this regard, I wish to emphasize 3 points. First, Indonesia continues to place nuclear disarmament as the highest priority. This is our long-standing national position, as well as a member of non-aligned movement. Yet, despite the successful outcome of the 2010 review conference, disarmament pillar is the least implemented. I repeat, disarmament pillar is the least implemented. We should not forget that non-proliferation earns its legitimacy from the larger objective of nuclear disarmament. When non-nuclear weapon states give up their rights to such weapon, nuclear weapon states have to disarm their arsenal. Further, nuclear weapons free zone treaties, including the Bangkok Treaty and Mongolia nuclear weapon free status, are crucial for global disarmament and non-proliferation. Indonesia therefore calls upon all nuclear weapon states to ratify related protocols to all treaties establishing nuclear weapon free zone, withdraw any reservation or interpretative declaration incompatible with their object and purpose, and respect the denuclearization status of this zone. My second point is to ensure the right of all states in using nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. The NPT enjoys wide support despite bearing proliferation because it guarantees peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Thus, Indonesia would like to reaffirm that non-proliferation should not bar peaceful uses. Preferential treatment should be given to non-nuclear weapon states for promotion of peaceful uses, and all parties should continue to support IAEA in discharging its safeguard and verification mandate. Thirdly, we must focus on the ultimate objective of the NPT. All parties must support the NPT process. As such, the intention to dismantle existing disarmament arrangement is damaging to our spirit and commitment, and therefore must be prevented. With great powers come great responsibility. We urge the nuclear weapon states to set a positive example that better reflects their responsibility. We regret that the 2015 review conference was unable to produce an outcome. Nevertheless, we must remain committed to the 2020 review conference and beyond, and make every effort to avoid another failure. This time, we must ensure that any outcome of the 2020 review conference should not be less than or backtrack from the commitment of the previous outcomes. This requires genuine political will and flexibility by the nuclear weapon states. Indonesia also believes that once the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons enters into force, it will contribute to furthering the objective of total elimination of nuclear weapons, as enshrined in the Article 6 of the NPT. Finally, Mr. President, former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon once underlined, a world free of nuclear weapons will be safer and more prosperous. Let us all therefore reaffirm our commitment to the NPT and make nuclear weapons a thing of the past. Indonesia stands ready to engage constructively with everyone in the NPT process. Thank you, Heiko.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Ms. Marzulli, for your statement. And now I give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Jacek Kaputowicz, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nuclear affairs are back on top of the agenda of international politics, and there is no day without the news on nuclear issues. Politicians attach the utmost importance to topics like denuclearization of the DPRK, further implementation of the JCPOA, erosion of the INF. They have dominated international political discourse in the recent months. Only over the last year, the President of Poland had the occasion to speak twice on the nuclear non-proliferation and this distinguished forum. There is no doubt that the Non-Proliferation Treaty has been a fundamental document, remaining the only global, legally binding instrument that commits the nuclear weapon states to continue negotiations towards nuclear disarmament. It also requires all its states party to pursue general and complete disarmament, as well as to refrain from acquiring nuclear weapons. Since its adoption, the NPT has become an important part of international law and a universal standard. Over the years, the NPT has proved its value, containing the proliferation of nuclear weapons, setting standards of responsible behavior in this domain, and providing platform of cooperation between nuclear and non-nuclear weapons states. The NPT has adapted successfully to the changing circumstances. It was possible thanks to the existing instruments of coexistence improvement in the form of the preparatory committees and the review conferences, which make it possible to ventilate ideas and to test various solutions. Next year, we will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the NPT's entry into force. Mr. President, the NPT regime has unfolded among three main pillars: disarmament, non-proliferation, and peaceful use of nuclear energy. All are mutually enabling, reinforcing, and balancing elements. The first two aspects could be described as a work in progress at best. Despite the achievements in reducing nuclear warheads and their means of delivery, further progress remains a serious challenge. The main reason for that is a very complicated and unpredictable international security environment, which is not conducive to pursue further disarmament efforts. Non-compliance is the most serious challenge the NPT is facing today. The failure of some states to comply with the NPT's provisions and their safeguards obligations, the case in point was the DPRK, erodes confidence and undermines the goals of the treaty. The last pillar, however, peaceful use of nuclear energy, has been at least controversial and largely successful. Under the auspices of International Atomic Agency, technical support has been created. It offers a wide array of programs to support nuclear-related research and development, national legislative frameworks, as well as international cooperative efforts. The NPT's efficiency must be strengthened, in our opinion. It is the only comprehensive instrument aiming at stopping proliferation of nuclear weapons while preserving the right of states to pursue civil nuclear energy. Thanks to the NPT regime, the transparency has immensely increased. The verification instruments are getting more and more effective. That would not be possible without consistent support of institutions, International Atomic Energy Agency, comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization and United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs. We should aim at closing the gap in the NPT system. This includes working towards entry into force of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, commencement of negotiations on a treaty banning the production of fissile material for use in nuclear weapons and other explosive devices, the Fissile Material Cut-off Treaty, as well as establishing a robust and credible verification regime of nuclear disarmament measures. In this regard, we welcome the works of the International Partnership for Nuclear Disarmament Verification and the United Nations Group of Governmental Experts on Nuclear Disarmament Verification, in which Poland is actively engaged. Mr. President, let me address the challenges for the NPT regime stemming from East Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Firstly, the DPRK's nuclear program still presents challenge for the NPT, despite encouraging diplomatic developments. On the Korean Peninsula, a lasting peace will not be achieved without the denuclearization of the DPRK in a complete, verifiable, and irreversible manner, in accordance with several United Nations Security Council resolutions. Secondly, it is in our common interest to stabilize the situation in the Middle East, reduce tensions in the region, and, most importantly, to prevent further proliferation of nuclear weapons. In order to address those concerns, Poland, together with the US, organized in Warsaw the Ministerial Conference to promote future of peace and security in the Middle East. One of its deliverables was the decision to establish a working group on curbing missile development and proliferation. We are firm in our conviction that Iran must continue to fulfill all of its nuclear-related commitments under the NPT, as well as the JCPOA. In this regard, we welcome the International Atomic Energy Agency's efforts to strictly monitor and verify Iran's commitments. We should find a way forward on the operationalization of the weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. New creative ideas based on a realistic evaluation of regional needs are needed. Fourthly, in Europe, return to the full compliance by the Russian Federation is the only way to save the INF Treaty, unless the Russian Federation destroys in a verifiable way all of its 9M729 missile systems. It will bear the sole responsibility for the end of the INF Treaty. It will have significant impact on strategic stability in Europe and, as such, for the current NPT review cycle. Mr. President, upholding the rules-based order reflects long-term objectives of the Polish security policy. My country has been a committed and pragmatic supporter of strengthening non-proliferation norms. Our priority focus on securing widespread and credible verification mechanisms, better implementation of safeguards, stronger risk reduction measures, as well as tighter international cooperation in nuclear safety and security. During Poland last year's chairmanship in the second preparatory committee for the 2020 review conference of the NPT, we have outlined paths towards the successful outcome of the upcoming review conference by presenting the chair's summary and the chair's reflection on the state of the NPT. We hope they will constitute a point of departure for our successors in upholding the integrity and credibility of the NPT and securing its effective implementation. Close cooperation between Polish and Dutch chairs of the preparatory committees remains fundamental in this respect. New mechanisms of cooperation among the consecutive chairs have contributed to strengthening the review cycle. They include regular consultations, exchange of know-how, organization of regional conferences, and expert support. Mr. Chairman, the NPT is not a perfect instrument, nor has been its implementation. However, without the NPT, the world would have been much less stable and secure. It is our collective duty to ensure its viability in the years to come. The 2020 Review Conference must be our common success. To attain it, we must focus on common interests, build bridges where differences persist, and take bold steps where we see opportunities for deeper and wider cooperation. Only then can we live up to our common obligations. Thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Kaputovich for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Jean-Yves Le Drian, Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank you, Mr. President, for having convened this very important debate. I would also like to thank Ms. Nakamitsu and Mr. Amano for their very enlightening briefings at the beginning of our meeting. At a time when the international security environment continues to degrade and when the nuclear threat is coming back in full force, it is crucial to preserve the integrity of existing non-proliferation norms and to build a multilateral rule-based world order. As was recalled by the President of the Republic, Emmanuel Macron, in this chamber last September, it is important to unambiguously reaffirm the decisive role that the Non-Proliferation Treaty plays when it comes to international security. The NPT remains the cornerstone of strategic stability on the global scale and represents an irreplaceable barrier in the face of the risk of nuclear proliferation. And 50 years following its signing, the treaty is an undeniable success for three reasons. First of all, the NPT has, since 1968, led to a number of states to give up their nuclear weapons in Europe, Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, and only a few countries have developed arsenals outside of the NPT. Secondly, the NPT has allowed to develop the peaceful applications of nuclear energy under the auspices of the IAEA, and today nuclear energy is an important source of low-carbon electricity for some 50 states. The non-energy applications of nuclear technology are even more widespread. Finally, the NPT has brought about drastic reductions of the nuclear arsenals in the world compared to the World Cold War levels, a reduction of some 80%. However, this success was not arrived at without some crises along the way. Clandestine nuclear facilities and activities that were not declared to the IAEA were discovered first in Iraq, then in North Korea, Libya, Iran, and Syria. Clandestine non-state networks, in particular the AQ-CON network, have played an important role in that series of crises. And the involvement of this council, the perseverance of its members, the determination of all, and the work of the IAEA have allowed to overcome those crises, with the notable exception of North Korea, despite the recent decrease in tensions there. And those results were most often arrived at through diplomatic means. Despite that succession of upheavals, the NPT has held up because its state parties have remained determined to preserve it. Today, the preservation of the NPT remains more crucial than ever, despite a context that is laden with crises. It is more essential than ever because the threat posed by the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and means of their delivery has not disappeared, because the reduction of the American and Russian arsenals, which are by far the largest, must continue, and expectations for nuclear disarmament remain high in the international community. And however, this has led some to prioritize an exclusively declaratory approach, seeking the prohibition of nuclear weapons. However, disarmament cannot be decreed. Only specific actions count. And finally, because energy needs continue to increase throughout the world, and combating CO2 emissions also involves the use of nuclear energy. This, for example, has allowed France to achieve CO2 emissions per capita that are lower than the global average. How then can we strengthen the NPT, and what could our collective roadmap be in this sense? First of all, the balance of the three pillars of the NPT must be respected. This has been voiced by several speakers, and this is the legitimate expectation of all. Firstly, a firm and unified response to nuclear proliferation must be adopted, and the top priority here should, of course, be resolving the North Korean crisis. The North Korean ballistic and nuclear threat remains unacceptable, and NPT state parties must make their expectations vis-a-vis North Korea clearly known. It must fully, verifiably, and irreversibly dismantle its nuclear and ballistic programs in conformity with the resolutions of this Council. Sanctions could then be lifted. Regarding Iran, our objective in the nuclear area is twofold: preserve the JCPOA and come to an agreement regarding the long-term future of the Iranian nuclear program. There's no scenario under which we would accept a situation of Iran becoming a nuclear state. Of course, we must also come to an agreement regarding reducing the threat of the Iranian missile program, which continues to grow despite the appeals of this Council. Going beyond crisis, we continue to rely on the IAEA, and we call on countries who have not yet done so to join the additional protocol. And because the threat of nuclear and radiological terrorism remain real, we must strengthen all measures to support Resolution 1540 of this Council. Secondly, looking to the future, we must promote progressive nuclear disarmament. The NPT was drafted some 50 years ago when the role of nuclear deterrence was recognized. That role remains relevant in a number of regions in the world. However, France wishes to see all countries act with determination to create the necessary conditions for a world free of nuclear weapons with non-diminished security for all. And this is indeed in line with the goal of general and complete disarmament enshrined in Article 6 of the treaty. In terms of specific actions, we could propose the following. First, the United States and Russia, which still possess more than 90% of nuclear arsenals, must continue their concerted efforts with a view to their reduction. Secondly, negotiating a treaty banning the production of fissile material at the Conference on Disarmament is essential in order to prevent the risk of a resumed nuclear arms race, and it is indeed an essential step on the path towards a world free of nuclear weapons. Third, the early entry into force of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty remains key. It is key to ensuring that no new nuclear weapons, are developed and designed, and we call on all states affected to sign and ratify that instrument and to support the CTBTO. Fourth, work on verification of nuclear disarmament is also important to build trust, and they should be continued. Fifth, reducing strategic risks related to nuclear weapons requires transparency of nuclear doctrines, dialogue between political and military leaders, mechanisms for communications in times of crisis, and assurance measures. Much has been done since the birth of deterrence, and these efforts must continue. And finally, to conclude, a few words on the civilian uses of nuclear energy. It must be continued with full respect for ensuring the best conditions of safety and security, and through its numerous arrangements for cooperation, France is supporting countries that would like to follow or continue along this path, and our voluntary contributions to the Technical Cooperation Fund of the IAEA will be maintained. France will continue working to ensure that the major balances of our non-proliferation system in the nuclear area are maintained, and that we are able to strengthen them with new binding measures, and we are available to all those who wish to pursue this path in good faith.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Le Drian for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Sheikh Sabah Al-Khalid Al-Hamad Al-Sabah, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Kuwait.
شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. To begin with, I would like to commend your initiative in convening this public formal meeting under the item Non-proliferation. This meeting is being held before convening the review conference of the NPT in May 2020. I would like also to extend my thanks to Mr. Yukiya Amano, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu, the High Representative of Disarmament Affairs. Over the past month, the international scene has seen a momentum that has not been witnessed since the meeting of the Security Council in 2009 and the adoption of Resolution 1887. This was a resolution that reaffirmed that the NPT would remain the cornerstone in the NPT regime and the main pillar in the efforts of denuclearization and the peaceful use of nuclear energy. This momentum continued back then until the meeting of the states parties in 2010 and reaching an agreement that led to the plan of action that gave the peoples of the world a glimpse of hope to achieve concrete measures to dispose of the nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. We are meeting again in a high-level meeting after our participation in the Security Council high-level meeting in September 2018 to reaffirm once again the threat of nuclear proliferation and to stress the priority given by Security Council to the NPT and addressing the menace to humanity based on our responsibility to conflict prevention and maintenance of international peace and security. We reaffirm the firm and principled position of Kuwait regarding the NPT. Kuwait condemns the use of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction at any time and any place by whosoever. Considering this a serious violation to international law, we reiterate our commitment to the NPT and achieving its universality to preserve and promote the international regime of NPT. We recall the outcomes of the previous review conferences, including the outcome documents of 1995, 2000, and the Plan of Action of 2010. Mr. President, notwithstanding of our commitment and the commitment of all states parties to support the treaty, yet the regime remains to face great challenges in achieving its goals. 49 years after the entry into force of the treaty, the world remains to face the menace of proliferation of nuclear weapons and their proliferation. The peoples of our region remain to see the decision implemented, the decision of establishing a Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and all other weapons of mass destruction, taken in the review conference of 1995. This decision has led to the extension of the treaty indefinitely. The state of Kuwait and all other Arab countries reaffirm that the decision of 1995 shall remain valid and in force until its objectives have been achieved. The responsibility of its implementation falls on all states parties to the NPT, particularly the nuclear weapon states, including the 3 sponsoring states. At the same time, we stress that Israel should join the NPT and subject all its nuclear facilities to the monitoring and inspection of the IAEA. given the fact that Israel is the sole country in the Middle East that has not yet joined the NPT. Mr. President, debating NPT today is not limited to the menace and risk and threat of nuclear weapons. It covers also one of the key pillars of the treaty, which is the peaceful use of atomic energy. The State of Kuwait stresses that all states parties have the right to develop research and studies and possess the nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. And the exercise of this inherent right shall be in line with legal obligations of states and agreements with the IAEA. Kuwait firmly believes in multilateralism in the United Nations and the principles and provisions of the Charter. Therefore, preserving the NPT is a responsibility of all states. In May 2020, the international community will meet in New York to participate in the upcoming review conference. This requires redoubling our efforts as of today with genuine political will to ensure the success of the conference by demonstrating the maximum flexibility in positions to reach a consensus on the measures that will contribute to achieving our goals of a world free of nuclear weapons. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Al-Shabaab for his statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, China, first of all, would like to thank Germany for convening today's meeting. I would also like to thank USG Nakamitsu and Director General Amano for their briefings. President, the NPT Treaty is the cornerstone of the international nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation regime. Since the adoption 50 years ago, the treaty has provided important international institutional guarantee for avoiding nuclear war, preventing nuclear proliferation, and promoting nuclear energy for the benefit of mankind. It has played an important role in maintaining international peace and security. The 10th Review Conference of the treaty will be held in 2020. This is the occasion for the 50th anniversary of the entry into force of the treaty. It also marks the 25th anniversary of its indefinite extension. For the members of security at this pivotal moment to recall the achievements of the treaty from a historical perspective and reaffirm the strong support for the treaty is of particular importance in terms of safeguarding the NPT regime and promoting global security governance. President, the 10th round of the treaty review process has now reached a critical stage. The overall situation, however, does not give rise to much optimism. The contradictions in the field of nuclear disarmament are sharpened. Unilateralism and double standards in non-proliferation are prevalent. The multilateral arms control rules and order are being undermined. Under these new circumstances, the international community should uphold the concept of a community of shared future for mankind, bear in mind the big picture of the maintaining international peace and security, demonstrate political wisdom, strengthen unity and cooperation, and jointly steer the 2020 Review Conference towards pragmatic results. First, undertake effectively the responsibility and maintain global strategic stability. The nuclear weapon states should abandon the Cold War mentality and zero-sum concept, discard the nuclear deterrence policy based on the preemptive use of nuclear weapons, and diminish the role played by nuclear weapons in their national security policies so as to effectively reduce the risk of nuclear war. China calls upon Russia and the United States to continue to resolve their differences through negotiations and consultations, return to the compliance with their obligations of the INF Treaty as soon as possible, and explore the extension of the current U.S.-Russia Nuclear Disarmament Treaty, or New START Treaty. Second, adhere to the international rules and uphold the multilateral arms control regime. The international community should firmly support multilateralism and internationally recognize the principle of advancing in a balanced manner the three pillars of the NPT Treaty, and work together to safeguard the authority of the UN and the CD in Geneva in the field of multilateral arms control. Third, strengthen dialogue and consultation and safeguard the treaty regime. The authority, effectiveness, and universality of the treaty must be strengthened, not weakened. In nuclear disarmament, the principles such as maintaining global strategic stability, undiminished security for all, and the step-by-step process must be followed. The regional hotspot nuclear issues should be resolved peacefully through political and diplomatic means on the basis of respect for international law. All parties should actively encourage and promote the peaceful use of nuclear energy cooperation and make it a hallmark of the current round of treaty review process. On the issue of Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and other WMDs, the UN will hold a meeting later this year to discuss relevant issues. All parties should actively cooperate with each other to facilitate the smooth conduct of the meeting, creating conditions for the successful holding of the 2020 Review Conference. President, as the coordinator of the P5 process, China hosted a formal conference among the 5 nuclear weapon states in Beijing in this past January. The Beijing conference sent clear political signal to uphold the NPT regime. The 5 nuclear weapon states undertook to jointly safeguard the treaty regime, comprehensively and completely implement the treaty, promote its universality, and work together to make the 2020 Review Conference a success. They reiterated the willingness to follow the principle of undiminished security for all and work to achieve greater progress in nuclear disarmament. They confirmed that they will do their utmost to solve nuclear non-proliferation issues through political and diplomatic means. They remain committed to promoting international cooperation in the peaceful use of nuclear weapons and support these efforts to build nuclear weapon-free zones in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. President, committed to a path of peaceful development, China poses no threat to any country, and China will never pursue its own absolute security at the expense of other countries' interests. China will continue to implement the new concept of a common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security with its own concrete actions. Firmly safeguard the authority, universality, and effectiveness of the treaty, make its due contribution to the maintenance of international peace and security. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of South Africa. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. President. We highly appreciate that you are presiding over these timely and relevant discussions on the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT, just a few weeks before the start of the third NPT PrepCom on the 29th of April. Likewise, I want to thank the Director General of IAEA, Mr. Amano, and the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Ms. Nakamitsu, for their detailed and insightful briefing. We thank the Excellencies Prime Minister of Germany, Indonesia, Poland, France, and Kuwait for their input, and welcome the U.S. Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security, Ms. Thompson. Mr. President, allow me to reiterate South Africa's commitment to the attainment of a world free of nuclear weapons. In this context, I reaffirm my country's commitment to the NPT as the cornerstone of nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation regime, two sides of the same coin. It is undeniable that the NPT plays a critical role in the maintenance of international peace and security. The 3 broad objectives on NPT, namely nuclear disarmament, nuclear non-proliferation, and the peaceful use of nuclear energy, are inextricably linked and mutually reinforcing. Therefore, in our view, efforts to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons should be matched by an equal commitment by nuclear weapon states to eliminate all nuclear weapons in a verifiable and irreversible manner. As such, the support of this Council towards the full and balanced implementation of all objectives of the NPT is paramount. Regrettably, Mr. President, we remain disheartened at the apparent lack of urgency and seriousness with which nuclear disarmament has been approached in the NPT context. This state of affairs places the treaty, as well as its review process, under increasing pressure and falls far short of the expectations. Continued reliance on nuclear weapons, insecurity doctrines, the development of new types of nuclear weapons, and qualitative improvements to the existing arsenals have also not allayed the fears of non-nuclear weapon states. After almost 50 years since the entry into force of the NPT, we cannot be complacent about the continued threat posed by nuclear weapons and the lack of implementation of the disarmament obligations from Article 6. We must respect the treaty and the outcome of its review conferences to maintain its continued longevity. Measurable progress, in particular on nuclear disarmament, must therefore be a major determinant in achieving and sustaining international peace and security. With this in mind, Mr. President, South Africa believes that the 2019 PrepCom should respect the agreements arrived at in 1995, 2000, and 2010 in order to strengthen global security. The 2010 REFCOM should likewise not roll back or reinterpret previously agreed commitments, which constitute the current nuclear disarmament benchmarks. Whilst you are aware that some states are arguing for the creation of so-called special environment for nuclear disarmament, it is our view that this was already established in the entry into force of the NPT on the basis of a grand bargain. We believe that the success of the future review conference will be determined by the extent to which these undertakings are implemented. Mr. President, despite immense pressure and lobbying on South Africa and other United States member states, we clearly demonstrated our commitment towards nuclear disarmament when we deposited our instrument of ratification of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW, on 25 February 2019, joining 21 other member states that have ratified the treaty. We want to use this opportunity to encourage member states that have not done so to sign and ratify the TPNW at the earliest possible time in order to ensure its early entry into force. For us, Mr. President, the TPNW is a positive and a bold step towards a world free of nuclear weapons. It complements and reinforces the NPT. A mass movement and a clear call towards a nuclear-free world has begun, and it is unstoppable. Mr. President, it will be remiss of me not to commend the sterling role played by the IAEA in the implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The implementation of 2030 Agenda is critical for the socio-economic development of developing countries, especially on the African continent. We therefore urge this Council to fully respect the inalienable rights of the states parties to NPT to use nuclear technologies for peaceful purposes as envisaged in the treaty. We further call upon the Council and international community to continue to support the agency's technical cooperation projects and activities. The agency furthermore continues to verify and monitor the implementation by Iran of its nuclear-related commitment under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, which remains one of the recent success stories of multilateral diplomacy. We call upon this Council to continue to support and encourage these contributions to international peace and security by the agency, and therefore reiterates our calls for the preservation of JCPOA. Mr. President, the nuclear-free zones will continue to play an important role in preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons. In this regard, I pay tribute to Pelendaba Treaty, which commemorates its 10th anniversary this year since its entry into force. In the same vein, my delegations call for the early establishment of the Middle East free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, as outlined in the 1995 resolution. Mr. President, South Africa strongly supports the full implementation of the NPT and its universality in pursuit of the goal of achieving and maintaining a world free from nuclear weapons. In this regard, we will do well to remember that the strength, credibility, and utility of the NPT rest on a fundamental bargain which all of us should uphold. We would like to express our profound appreciation to Germany for facilitating the press statement that we will be adopting later. Mr. President, finally, I want to leave this council with a quote from one of South African presidents. It says, and I quote, "There cannot be no safe hands for nuclear weapons." Close quotes. I thank you.
I thank the representative of South Africa for his statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of the United States. Please.
Thank you, Foreign Minister Maas, for convening this crucial meeting today on supporting the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT. I'd also like to thank Undersecretary General Nakamitsu and Director General Amano for their briefings today. Mr. President, the Security Council tackles some of the greatest challenges to international peace and security, but perhaps no challenge is more potent or more relevant to all of us than the further proliferation of nuclear weapons. We're approaching the 50th anniversary of the entry into force of the NPT. Over nearly 5 decades, the NPT has grown even more critical to the maintenance of international peace and security. It has made us all more secure by constraining the spread of nuclear weapons and has also thereby enabled the global peaceful use of nuclear energy and helped create conditions for progress on nuclear disarmament. 50 years ago, few would have dared to predict that we would be here today celebrating the success of the NPT. Before the NPT, U.S. government national intelligence estimates, the NIEs, expressed dire concern about a possible snowball effect of cascading proliferation, which would increase the world's nuclear stockpile and undermine confidence in the ability of non-proliferation policies to prevent such an action. Yet in a demonstration of remarkable diplomatic resolve, the international community joined together against this collective threat, reflecting rare consensus during a time of Cold War polarization. Diplomatic efforts culminated in the negotiation and entry into force of the NPT. There's been unwavering international consensus about the indispensable role of the treaty to collective peace and security. The NPT has succeeded for half a century because it serves the fundamental and widely recognized common interest of preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons. We have also seen enormous disarmament progress, in part because the NPT helped curtail the emergence of new nuclear powers. With the easing of Cold War tensions and the success of the NPT-based non-proliferation regime in impeding proliferation, it's been possible to reduce the nuclear arsenals of both the United States and Russia to levels not seen since the 1950s. The U.S. stockpile today has been reduced to approximately 12% of its Cold War peak. We must also recognize that advancing towards the ultimate goal of a world without nuclear weapons must take into account the global security environment. We cannot overlook the fact that the actions of those states that are expanding and modernizing their nuclear stockpiles, threatening their neighbors, and violating their arms control obligations have contributed to a deterioration in global security conditions. My esteemed colleagues, the United States is in the process of developing implementation plans for a path-breaking new initiative, creating an environment for nuclear disarmament, or CEND. This initiative is aimed at bringing countries together in a constructive dialogue, exploring ways in which it might be possible to ameliorate conditions in the global security environment so as to make possible a more conducive and further progress towards, and indeed ultimately to achieve, nuclear disarmament. In this respect, as well as its emphasis upon dialogue and diplomatic engagement with all relevant parties, the CEND initiative stands in stark contrast to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or the BAN Treaty. The BAN Treaty fails to address the security challenges that continue to make nuclear deterrence necessary, and it seeks to stigmatize rather than engage with countries that rely upon nuclear deterrence for their national security. As we turn towards the 2020 Review Conference, or RevCon, the United States seeks a positive outcome from that meeting that reflects consensus on a broadest basis as possible. We believe consensus is possible if NPT parties focus on the big picture, emphasizing their common interests and avoiding using divisive issues such as the BAN Treaty and a Middle East WMD-free zone to hold the RevCon hostage. To strengthen the NPT and the non-proliferation regime, states must support universalization of the IAEA Additional Protocol, or AP, which has become the de facto nuclear safeguard standards and makes the AP a condition of nuclear supply. States must also be united in demanding the final, fully verified denuclearization of North Korea. They must also continue to hold that a secure and peaceful and bright future is possible for North Korea if it fulfills its commitments. And we must remain united in our determination that Iran must never acquire a pathway to nuclear weapons. The 2020 NPT Review Conference will also be an opportunity to highlight how the NPT and the broader nuclear non-proliferation regime have made possible thriving international cooperation on peaceful uses of nuclear energy, science, and technology. We aim to build on that success. We're optimistic that the NPT will endure. Yet this outcome is far from guaranteed. We now must continue to preserve and strengthen the NPT so that 50 years from now, our successors may mark the 100th anniversary of the treaty and an enduring accomplishment that continues to promote international security and prosperity. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of Belgium.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I must first thank you for organizing this high-level briefing to support the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And this is an opportunity 1 year ahead of the NPT Review Conference and the 50th anniversary of its entry to force to reiterate decisively here in the Council our support to this foundation of our collective security system. May I also thank Madam Nakamitsu and Mr. Amano for their briefings. Mr. President, Belgium is concerned at the erosion of the multilateral system based on international law, which is particularly evident in the areas of non-proliferation and disarmament. I need mention here only those threats posed surrounding the implementation of the INF and JCPOA treaties, as well as the uncertainties surrounding the future of the New START treaty and the North Korean dossier. These recent developments are testimony to the increased polarization here in the community of non-proliferation community, where confidence and cooperation between states are receding. This climate is testing the global architecture for non-proliferation and disarmament and is making it difficult to achieve progress, which is essential while the risks of proliferation are increasing. And it's for this reason that Belgium is reaffirming its strong support for the 3 pillars of the NPT and continues to call for the complete, balanced, and comprehensive implementation of the action plan for the NPT Review Conference of 2010. These concrete measures, which are mutually reinforcing when it comes to nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and the peaceful use of nuclear energy, continue to be relevant and are an acceptable basis for all for us to pursue the ultimate objective of a world free of nuclear weapons. Turning now to nuclear proliferation, curbing this proliferation is one of the major successes of the NPT, and it is an incontrovertible achievement for collective security, and it requires constant strengthening. In parallel, we must also continue to promote the peaceful use of nuclear energy. We must facilitate the exchanges of nuclear technologies for peaceful uses and encourage cooperation with developing countries. Finally, Belgium is attached to the pursuit of nuclear disarmament in line with Article 6 of the NPT. The objective of a world free of nuclear weapons is a common objective, but also a shared responsibility. And given this context, Belgium wishes to underscore the prime responsibility lying with the 5 permanent members of the Security Council who are possessors of nuclear weapons. Mr. President, no other weapon has the destructive power of a nuclear bomb. This points up not only the need for urgent disarmament, but also the need for a proactive approach aimed at non-proliferation. And on this difficult path, it is essential that we have in place a legally binding instrument prohibiting nuclear tests, and Belgium, coordinated with Iraq, Article 14 of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, CTBT, and we call on states that are not yet party, especially Annex II states, to accede to the treaty so that it can finally enter into force. A nuclear weapon-free world is predicated on a world without nuclear tests. And as far as my country is concerned, this principle also applies to DPRK and makes the CTBT a very relevant instrument for any negotiated solution aimed at ensuring that there is verifiable and definitive denuclearization. The future of the INF Treaty is relevant to the security of Europe, and we renew our call to Russia to resume its complete and verifiable compliance with the treaty so as to preserve its existence. The frittering away of the treaty is taking place in parallel with the rapid evolution in missile technology, such as the emergence of hypersonic missiles with potential consequences for nuclear doctrine and deterrence. These developments point up the need to ascribe an appropriate place to the issue of missiles in international debates. And I reaffirm also my country's desire to see the New START Treaty prolonged, extended, as the sole instrument governing the deployment of strategic nuclear missiles between the United States and Russia. Mr. President, Belgium therefore reaffirms strongly its support for the NPT. It must be preserved as a whole. The NPT is the cornerstone of the global nuclear non-proliferation regime and the essential foundation of our pursuit of nuclear disarmament and an important element in preventing and building confidence with a view to maintaining international peace and security. Thank you.
Representative of Belgium for his statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of the Côte d'Ivoire.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. President, my delegation welcomes the convening of this debate in the run-up to the review conference of the Non-Proliferation Treaty that will be held in 2020. We congratulate Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu, Undersecretary General and High Representative of the Secretary General for Disarmament Affairs, and Mr. Yukiya Amano, Director General of the IAEA, for the quality of their briefings. Mr. President, in 4 weeks here in New York, the last
du TNP, entré en vigueur en 1970. Cette rencontre sera l'ultime occasion pour les États partis de parvenir à un consensus sur le point de désaccord dans la mise en œuvre du TNP. Elle intervient dans un environnement sécuritaire international en constante mutation.
It takes place in a constantly changing international environment where the risk of the acquisition of weapons of mass destruction by terrorist groups and other non-state actors is increasingly high. In this context, we're particularly concerned by the lack of progress in nuclear disarmament and the blockages of its key mechanisms. As a state party to the NPT, Côte d'Ivoire remains fundamentally committed to preserving and strengthening international non-proliferation architecture. We also signed the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons on September 20 of 2017, the date when it was open to signature. Indeed, for my country, the complete elimination of nuclear weapons remains the only guarantee to ensure that our common will to maintain international peace and security in line with the UN Charter becomes a reality. Mr. President, convinced that the NPT, as the cornerstone of the international non-proliferation regime, must be preserved, whatever disagreements there might be in terms of its interpretation, we hope that the 2020 conference will allow to make the expected progress, in particular in the implementation of the three pillars, namely nuclear disarmament, nuclear non-proliferation, and the use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. We would also like to emphasize the need to ensure the application of Article 4 of the treaty so that states who do not possess nuclear energy can further benefit from civilian applications of nuclear energy, in particular in the areas of agriculture and medicine. In that context, we welcome the fruitful cooperation that my country has enjoyed with the IAEA, which allowed to build a geophysical facility in Lamto and open the first radiotherapy center for cancer treatment in Abidjan. We plan to continue that cooperation, increase our investments into this area, and open our first nuclear medicine center. Mr. President, my country believes that non-nuclear weapon states have a legitimate claim to sufficient security assurances through a universal legally binding instrument that would protect them from any potential actions by nuclear weapon states. These security assurances must be supported by verification measures, as well as measures to strengthen transparency and trust between states parties in line with Article 6 of the NPT and its 2010 Plan of Action. Thus, states parties in their respective regional spaces could constructively work to promote disarmament, for instance, through the creation of nuclear weapons-free zones, such as those that have already been established in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and Central Asia. In that regard, my country urges the states of the Middle Eastern region to continue negotiations with a view to conclude a treaty of the same nature. We also launch an urgent appeal to all countries who have not done so to sign and ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Although it has been signed by 184 states and ratified by 168, it has not yet entered into force, having failed to gain the ratification of all 44 states contained in its Annex 2. My delegation also calls for the early conclusion of a treaty banning the production of fissile materials for nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices that would undeniably further the cause of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Mr. President, while the American-Korean summit in Hanoi on the North Korean nuclear issue did not achieve the expected results, my country nonetheless welcomes the choice of dialogue as a means to find lasting solutions to the current situation in the Korean Peninsula. We also express our thanks and encouragement to the IAEA for the remarkable work that they have done in the context of the Iranian nuclear agreement. To conclude, Mr. President, Côte d'Ivoire is convinced that the nuclear threat is not an inevitable destiny. It was created by mankind, and mankind bears a pressing duty to eradicate it once and for all in order to build a safer world. I thank you.
Thank you to the representative of the Côte d'Ivoire. And now I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. As we embark on another review cycle for the Non-Proliferation Treaty, it is important that we, as the Security Council, charged with the maintenance of international peace and security, take a step back and consider the contribution made by the NPT to international stability. For For the past 50 years, the NPT has minimized the proliferation of nuclear weapons and provided the framework for significant nuclear disarmament. To take the United Kingdom's own example, we have more than halved the number of warheads since the height of the Cold War. Of course, the NPT has not just been about prohibition. It has also provided the framework to develop secure and safe, peaceful uses for nuclear energy globally. This ensures the international community can have confidence in the safety of civilian nuclear energy. But where proliferation does occur, the NPT also provides the framework for this Council's action to contain it. Under the JCPOA, Iran is subjected to a rigorous program of inspections made possible by the architecture underpinning the NPT. And while this Council continues to demand that North Korea dismantle its nuclear program, the verification of that will ultimately need to be conducted consistent with the NPT. As we approach another review conference, we should keep in mind that there is more that unites us than our differences, and that we all agree we should strengthen the NPT going forward. The United Kingdom is committed to working with all partners to secure a positive outcome to the review conferences. This means resolving the chairmanship as well as agreeing an agenda for the RevCon in 2020 and the third PrepCon. Mr. President, despite these challenges, it is important that we continue to demonstrate progress on disarmament in a way which strengthens all of our security. This is why the United Kingdom is working on developing disarmament verification solutions, particularly with the United States, Sweden, and Norway in the Quad. Establishing an effective verification regime will be vital if we are to realize our long-term goal of multilateral nuclear disarmament. States will need to have confidence that a nuclear-armed state has dismantled its warheads, and that, crucially, this is done in a way which makes us safer, rather than spreading nuclear knowledge. This work has demonstrated that non-nuclear weapon states can play an important role in the development of nuclear disarmament verification while preventing proliferation, and we encourage all states to fully participate in this process to continue to grow capacity for verification worldwide, and very much welcome France and Germany's joint verification exercise scheduled for later this year. Mr. President, we must all continue to promote the step-by-step approach and work for universalization of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, early entry into force of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, and promote the early commencement and conclusions of negotiations on a fissile material cut-off treaty in the Conference on Disarmament. Let me set out some of the steps the United Kingdom is taking to help support a successful review conference outcome. We will be submitting a draft implementation report to the PrepCon, setting out how we have implemented the NPT in this review cycle, and we encourage all states to do the same. We intend to use our coordinator role of the P5 process to continue the excellent work that has taken place under Chinese leadership, including continuing the P5's dialogue with all signatories. We will remain a strong supporter of the IAEA and all the work it does, including efforts related to technical cooperation. The United Kingdom has made significant extra budgetary contributions to support the refurbishment of the Cybersdorf laboratories, including just over €1 million between 2016 and 2018. We are pleased to have signed a new voluntary offer agreement, an additional protocol with the IAEA in June 2018, and the Nuclear Safeguards Act 2018, which enables the United Kingdom to establish a domestic nuclear safeguards regime. And we continue to regard the additional protocol as the gold standard of safeguards, and urge those states who are yet to have done so to agree and ratify these agreements with the IAEA. We strongly support the state-level concept. But Mr. President, I would also note the echoing silence on compliance issues from some of the states which are most eager to promote the Nuclear Weapon Ban Treaty, a treaty which lacks any concrete provisions for verifying compliance. The UK will not support, sign, or ratify this treaty. Mr. President, we should not underestimate the challenges facing the Non-Proliferation Treaty, themselves an indication of the challenges facing international security. Any meaningful discussion on disarmament must take into account the wider security environment. We all have a responsibility to work towards a safer, more stable world in which those states with nuclear weapons feel able to relinquish them. And this is where the United Nations Security Council must make its own contribution to the NPT. That must involve remaining resolute in our determination to fully disarm North Korea and to prevent the escalation of conflicts. We must give our full political support to the continuation of the NPT process and an agreed consensus-based outcome to the upcoming review conference. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of Peru.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Peru welcomes the convening of this meeting to focus the world's attention on the need to tackle proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and their delivery systems. And here I'm speaking especially of nuclear weapons. We welcome the presence of senior officials with us today, and we're grateful for the important briefings that we heard from the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu, and the Director General of the IAEA, Mr. Yukiya Amano. Throughout its history, this Council has maintained unity in its fight against the proliferation of nuclear weapons, in the discharge of the main responsibility entrusted to it in the UN Charter, that of maintaining international peace and security. There is no better way to eliminate the risk posed by weapons of mass destruction than to ensure that they do not exist. Therefore, we support the preparatory work leading to the 10th NPT review conference, which is slated for next year. Peru maintains its strong stance of support for the full implementation of the 3 pillars of the NPT, and we wish here to stress the importance of ensuring the universality of that instrument. To this end, we urge nuclear weapon states to abide by their commitments under Article 6 of the treaty and to pursue total elimination of such weapons, and in so doing prevent the humanitarian fallout of these deadly artifacts of war. We are aware of and committed to this objective. Indeed, we played an active role in the adoption of, and we subscribed to, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and we are hoping that one day we can see the accession of all countries, especially those that possess nuclear weapons. We are of the view that this legally binding instrument strengthens and complements the current disarmament and non-proliferation regimes, and more particularly, it contributes to the implementation of Article 6 of the NPT on the reduction of such weapons. Furthermore, we have been observing with concern the challenges arising in recent years to the non-proliferation regimes, and more specifically in respect of nuclear weapons, and which imply an even more serious threat to international peace and security in the current context. We will continue to seek unity in this Council in our response to these challenges, as we have seen in the nuclear and ballistic programs of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Turning now to the inalienable right of all states to develop nuclear energy for peaceful uses, we support the work that has been done by the IAEA in implementing safeguards and verification mechanisms for the use of nuclear energy. Mr. President, turning now to nuclear disarmament, it's imperative that we begin negotiations leading to a fissile material cutoff treaty. In this connection, we urge especially nuclear weapon states to break the deadlock in the Conference on Disarmament so there can be an immediate start to the negotiation of a non-discriminatory and verifiable treaty. As we look ahead to the 10th NPT Review Conference, we are of the view that this regime can only be strengthened if we reduce remaining nuclear arsenals, and this prompts me to urge nuclear weapon states to comply with Article 6 of the NPT and adopt concrete measures. Peru is looking forward to finding points of convergence on well-known points of divergence. In this connection, We must note with regret the suspension of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Agreement and the INF Treaty, and we urge the countries to resume dialogue with a view to solving their differences and achieving agreements based on the principles of irreversibility, verifiability, and transparency. We close with our reaffirmation of our strong commitment and resolute support for the success of the NPT Review Conference. We believe that it is necessary for us to work on the different perceptions of insecurity by countering proliferation and the arms race and coming up with measures geared towards cooperation, trade, and development. Thank you.
Thank you to the representative of Peru for his statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of the Dominican Republic.
Gracias. Thank you, sir. We're grateful to the presidency for convening this high-level meeting. We're also grateful to Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu and Mr. Amano for their very helpful briefings. Firstly, we wish to recognize the valuable role played by the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, in providing assistance to states in the safe use of nuclear energy for development and peace. We're grateful for the closer relations between our country and the IAEA, especially when it comes to implementing cooperation projects. At present, the Dominican Republic is a counterpart in 2 national projects and 47 regional projects with the IAEA, which are now in the final or implementing stages and under the leadership of our Ministry of Energies and Mines. Mr. President, the Dominican Republic reiterates its strong commitment to the obligations set out in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and its 3 fundamental pillars: disarmament, non-proliferation, and the peaceful use of nuclear energy. Full implementation of these 3 pillars are key to achieving a world free of nuclear weapons and also key to the maintenance of international peace and security. We welcome the progress made within the framework of non-proliferation including the JCPOA with Iran. Its adoption and effective implementation so far, despite setbacks, is a clear show of the success that multilateralism and dialogue can achieve. It is our hope that Iran, states parties to the agreement, and other member states will refrain from taking any measures that will undermine the agreement and the confidence deposited in the agreement. For this reason, we encourage the adoption of similar concrete and practical actions in the field of disarmament, which is the pillar of the treaty and which we have not seen any progress on. We believe that the only guarantee against the threat or use of nuclear weapons is their complete elimination and prohibition, and this must be done in a transparent, verifiable, and irreversible manner. For this reason, we are signatory states to the treaty which prohibits nuclear weapons adopted in July 2017. This treaty is the logical and necessary outcome of the deep concern expressed by member states of the NPT, given the catastrophic humanitarian consequences posed by any use of nuclear weapons. Strengthening the NPT is an urgent multilateral response to the erosion of bilateral treaties and to the threat posed by efforts to upgrade nuclear weapons. And this is all leading to a fresh nuclear arms race. And here, we have been observing with concern the recent suspension of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Agreement, or the INF agreement, and we hope that the parties can soon resume dialogue and arrive at workable conclusions. There is an element that strengthens the non-proliferation and disarmament regimes, and that is the establishment of nuclear weapon-free zones. From our historic experience of being a part of a densely populated area declared as the first nuclear weapon-free zone through the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean, the Tlatelolco Treaty, we can attest to the fact that the establishment of such zones furthers the achievement of our aim of general and complete disarmament, as well as the promotion of regional and international stability. Likewise, it is our hope that at the next NPT review conference, we will have an opportunity to settle the matter of a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East, as agreed in the final document of the 2010 NPT conference. Furthermore, we encourage states parties to the NPT to abide by their commitments, especially those set out in Article 6 of the treaty, which call for negotiations aimed at general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control. We are of the view that the treaty, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, is a complement to the NPT, and we therefore call on states that are under the Annex 2 to that treaty that have not yet ratified it to do so, so as to ensure its entry into force. We cannot overlook the need to negotiate a non-discriminatory, legally binding instrument that prohibits as soon as possible the production of fissile materials, an FMCT. In conclusion, we wish to say that it is a contradiction in terms that we are living in a world aspiring to peace, and yet we allow for the existence of nuclear weapons. These weapons are a threat to our collective security, to the development of our nations, and to the environment. Their use runs counter to the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter and international laws. For the Dominican Republic, there is a clear intersection between disarmament and development. We are of the view that it is not in our best interest to earmark excessive resources to the maintenance and development of new nuclear weapon technologies instead of using those resources to meet the fundamental needs of our peoples. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Dominican Republic for his statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of Equatorial Guinea for his statement.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We're grateful to and we congratulate the Federal Republic of Germany for bringing this very important issue up for debate today. Supporting the Non-Proliferation Treaty, we're also grateful for the very insightful briefings from Ms. Nakamitsu, High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, and Mr. Amano, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Mr. President, the Republic of Equatorial Guinea is a country without weapons of mass destruction and without a nuclear program, nor do we plan to have any such programs in the distant or near future. We do not cooperate with military programs or civilian projects with other states or international institutions regarding nuclear activities or other WMDs because we are a strong advocate for universal nuclear disarmament. We have always called for states with nuclear military arsenals and those with such ambitions to bear their responsibility. And this is a constant theme of the statements delivered by our president, Mr. President Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, before the General Assembly and other international fora. Our call has always been to pursue the common objective of a world without nuclear weapons and the total elimination of weapons of mass destruction from the face of the earth. Equatorial Guinea underscores the importance of the NPT in this, the 50th year of its entry into force as the cornerstone of the non-proliferation regime. And it is the foundation for promoting the nuclear disarmament process and developing activities whereby nuclear energy is used for civilian purposes. However, the Republic of Equatorial Guinea never has shared the NPT approach of using this instrument only in countries that do not possess nuclear weapons. But little progress has been made with respect to eliminating these weapons by nuclear weapon states who are armed to the teeth with capacity to totally devastating our planet and making it into a complete wasteland. Mr. President, Equatorial Guinea encourages all parties to the NPT to show genuine political will for dialogue and to seek consensus that will enable us to reform that treaty, and more specifically, the first article of that international instrument, and to do so as soon as possible during the review conference that is slated for 2020. And this will also coincide with its 50th anniversary of entry into force. Equatorial Guinea is of the view that it is necessary to promote a nuclear disarmament process equal to the framework of the TPNW, which was adopted in June 2017, which provides for nuclear powers to work in collaboration with non-nuclear weapon states to continue to promote the objectives of strengthening the universal nuclear disarmament regime and the global nuclear non-proliferation regime, bearing in mind the interest and concrete and realistic initiatives of the international community. Our delegation is very attuned to the debate on the humanitarian impact of the threat or use of nuclear weapons. And viewing the current proliferation crisis, we believe that this council must remain united and undivided and assume its responsibility as the guarantor of international security, and it must respond firmly to any activity that seeks to counter this global regime, creating a deterrent effect to anyone who wishes to do so. Mr. President, we believe it is not enough to establish nuclear weapon-free zones, but we must declare the world as a whole as a zone free of nuclear weapons. Africa, through its signing of the Pelindaba Treaty, established itself as a nuclear weapon-free zone, and that is a key issue for Africa. The issue of controlling non-proliferation, the proper management of our uranium reserves, and for this reason we call on this council to protect the exploitation of the uranium in Africa and any region declared as a nuclear weapon-free zone to ensure that its use is only for civilian and peaceful uses and helps support the non-proliferation regime. Mr. President, we're fully in support of the OPCW, the IAEA, the 1540 Security Council Committee, the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, and their role in negotiating multilateral disarmament instruments and in preventing non-state actors, including terrorist groups, from gaining access to WMDs, nuclear weapons, and chemical and biological weapons. Equatorial Guinea strongly condemns the manufacture, stockpiling, distribution, and commercialization or the use of any chemical weapon wherever and by whomever. And we believe it's important to strengthen the non-proliferation regime for nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons, as well as to ensure that there is peaceful civilian use of nuclear weapons. Mr. President, we need to adapt this international instrument to meet the needs of today's world, because we are no longer in the time of the Cold War when that instrument entered into force. We therefore call for us to explore common points to reframe and adopt a new approach looking ahead to 2020, which is a different world from 1970, where the scope in respect of disarmament and non-proliferation was general in nature and equal for all states, without taking into consideration the differences and privileges enjoyed by some states, which we are now seeing in the current NPT, where some states are exempt from international obligations entailed in global nuclear disarmament, which calls into question international equality among states. Mr. President, allow me to conclude my statement with a strong plea to all those countries that are nuclear weapon states and who are bogged down in negotiations or which are yet to resolve pending issues to establish or renew non-proliferation agreements. Our plea is for them to pursue and to spare no effort to reach these agreements. Equatorial Guinea reiterates its full support for the Secretary General's agenda, which was published in May 2018, and here I'm referring to securing our common future. This agenda presents us with a series of practical measures, all of which are focused on weapons of mass destruction, conventional weapons, and on new fields of technological warfare. Thank you very much.
The representative of Equatorial Guinea for his statement. And now, last but not least, I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, Mr. Minister, I would like to tell you how pleased we are to see you in the presidency. And since I haven't had this opportunity yet, I would like to congratulate Germany with assuming the presidency of this council in April. We wish you every success. We're also thankful to the Director General of IAEA, Mr. Amano, and the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Ms. Nakamitsu, for their briefings. Mr. President, the Russian Federation, as one of the three depositaries of the NPT, attaches the utmost importance to the preservation and the stable functioning of this treaty. Its contribution to ensuring international peace and security can hardly be overstated. The treaty has played a crucial role in preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons, laid the foundation for gradual progress towards disarmament, primarily nuclear disarmament, and for the development of broad international cooperation in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. It can rightfully be considered an example of the effectiveness of international diplomacy and a shining example of international cooperation to address global problems. Unfortunately, despite all of the undeniable successes of the NPT, it must be recognized that it is approaching its 50th anniversary, and the next review conference, which is to sum up the five-year cycle of the functioning of the treaty, we are approaching that date in a very difficult context. In the context of the NPT, we are seeing deepening divisions and differences between various groups of states. Attempts are being made to undermine and review universally recognized norms and mechanisms in the area of non-proliferation. This has recently been compounded by new dangerous trends, which are exacerbating an already complex situation on the nuclear proliferation front. I am referring to attempts to use the NPT review process as a platform to settle political scores, including on issues that have nothing to do with the NPT. Long-standing divisions also remain regarding a number of agenda items in relation to the NPT. Mr. President, the Russian Federation shares the lofty goal of building a world free of nuclear weapons. As a responsible and consistent supporter of the process of nuclear disarmament, we are making our tangible contribution to the further reduction of strategic offensive arms. Last year, we reached the limits for delivery systems and warheads that were set by the START Treaty. Overall, Russia's nuclear arsenal has been reduced by more than 85%. It is evident to us that consistent efforts are required to lay the groundwork for further progress towards nuclear disarmament. First and foremost, this requires improving the strategic situation in certain regions and in the world as a whole. This is only possible through addressing the entirety of factors that are affecting strategic stability and international security. Those factors include, for instance, the unfettered deployment of U.S. global ABN systems, the development of high-precision non-nuclear offensive weapons, and the prospect of the placement of strike weapons in outer space, and the erosion of the international treaty system in the area of ensuring security and stability and arms control, as well as attempts to decrease the defense capabilities of other countries through illegitimate unilateral sanctions and circumventions of the Security Council of the United Nations. Without addressing these problems, we can hardly create an environment that would be favorable towards further nuclear disarmament. Mr. President, another burning issue in the context of the NPT is the weapons of mass destruction-free zone in the Middle East. The decision of the General Assembly, approved by majority in December 2018 to convene a conference on a WMD-free zone is meant to launch the practical implementation of the 1995 resolution on the Middle East and thus positively impact the general state of affairs in the context of the NPT review process. The GAA decision is a logical and balanced one. It does not run counter to the interests of the states in the Middle East region. Russia plans to participate in the conference on the WMD-free zone and contribute to its success, as well as support subsequent efforts towards creating the WMDFZ. It is important for the other nuclear weapons 5 states, as well as all countries in the Middle East, to join efforts to convene and hold the conference. A highly important role in efforts to reduce strategic offensive arms is played by the CTBT, which was meant to erect a solid bulwark against the spread and the improvement of nuclear weapons. Mr. President, we see IAEA safeguards as a key element of the non-proliferation regime. They are meant to prevent the diversion of peaceful uses of nuclear energy towards the creation of nuclear weapons. We firmly intend to continue providing assistance to the IAEA in strengthening its safeguard system. At the same time, it is extremely important to preserve the objective, depoliticized, and technically justified nature of the mechanism, as well as the clarity and transparency of its work for members of the treaty. Russia advocates for the universalization of the additional protocol on IAEA safeguards, which together with the comprehensive safeguards agreements should in the future become a universally recognized norm for verifying states' compliance with their non-proliferation obligations under the NPT. At the same time, we note that adhering to the additional protocol is voluntary. One aspect on which, as we see it, there is agreement among NPT states parties is the use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. In accordance with Article 4 of the treaty, states parties possess the inalienable right to use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, and the current level of technological development allows to combine nuclear and other energy production and lays the ground for improved, more flexible, and efficient energy systems. However, the use of nuclear technologies, as was justly mentioned by Mr. Amano, is not limited to just energy. It extends to uses in other areas, which includes industry, agriculture, medicine, climate, water use, and others. We believe that the NPT significantly broadens possibilities for the peaceful uses of nuclear energy in the interests of sustainable development while eliminating risks to nuclear non-proliferation. Mr. President, to conclude, we would like to express the hope that the upcoming review conference ends positively and that all NPT state parties at a minimum reaffirm the viability and relevance of the treaty, as well as their commitment to uphold their obligations under the treaty. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. And now there are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. And so I shall now make some concluding remarks in my national capacity. The exchange, I believe, clearly testified to the relevance of the topic. And I heard many, if not all, members of the Security Council expressing strong support to the NPT and its commitments. Concerns are tangible regarding the challenges that burden the NPT today, but I sensed readiness to jointly assume responsibility for the future of the treaty and for further advancing its goals beyond 2020. This meeting has also contributed to fostering a better understanding of the different views and priorities around the table here, and will help to find the right way forward towards a successful review conference. Let me thank all Security Council members for their support in holding today's meeting and for your active participation. The meeting is adjourned.